Welcome, and we'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Get right into the screen share. So we're in the Parsha of Shoftim, and we're going to get into now, as I've mentioned before, now that we're into the heart of Deuteronomy, we are getting into specific laws. And one major issue has to do with idolatry. As Professor Cheskel Kaufman points out, is that the way it is articulated in the Bible tends to be in terms of images and idols as in fetishes. And so the way idolatry is described in the Bible could be described more as fetishism than idolatry, because idolatry itself doesn't require images or statues or bowing down to statues. It has more to do with substituting some other form of worship and understanding what it is to worship something and to make something your God, which means essentially to consider it the ultimate source of your success, of your joy, of your happiness, of your life, etc. And through one's behavior and through one's words, praise that, as opposed to Hashem, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that we have tried to express, and as is expressed in the Torah. So idolatry essentially is substituting anything else. So there are people, obviously, who worship money, we could say that, or who worship sports, or who worship power, etc. But the Bible doesn't tend to describe it in that way. It tends to describe it, as Dr. Kaufman points out, in terms of idolatry, and that's the way we're going to describe it. And I believe it's really the way the Bible is describing it is in a metaphoric kind of way. And because I think precisely because we really don't pay that much attention to it, or we don't think it's that important, is why the Bible and the Torah right here is going to talk about it in this very, very strong position. And we need to understand that that is the point the Torah is trying to make, is how careful we need to be to avoid this kind of behavior. So we're on to verse 3 now, and we're talking about men and women who in a certain city, Be'echad sha'arecha, that's an important phrase, right? Be'echad sha'arecha, in one of your gates. And what it refers to is in one of your cities, right? A person, a man or a woman, asher ya'asa et hara, who does that which is wicked in the eyes of God, the Lord your God, to transgress his covenant. That's where we're at. And now we are specific as to what transgression we're talking about. Vayelech, and this person goes, v'ya'avod Elohim acherim, and serves other gods. Vayishtachu lahem, and he bows down to them. So the bowing down, of course, can be understood literally, that one is bowing down, but clearly bowing down is an act that indicates obedience. It indicates respect, deep respect. It indicates the willingness to be subject to that person, etc. So we have to understand, what is bowing down really refer to, right? V'lashamesh, and to serve, or layarech, or to the moon, or lachol. I'm sorry, I did not read this correctly. Forgive me. Vayishtachu lahem, and bow down to them. V'lashemesh, and to the sun, or layareach, or to the moon, or lachol tzva hashamayim, or to any of the host of heaven, asher lo tziviti, which I did not command. And again, understood to mean various powers in the world that are involved, forces in the world. So, la'avor brito. This is we read this before, right? To transgress his covenant. So, Gimel, asher lo tziviti, which I did not command la'ovdam, to serve them. In other words, it's saying it positively, but it's what I mean. What it really means, of course, is which I forbid you to serve. So this is your given report of this. It's told to you, Vishamata, and you have listened, you've heard this, Vidarashta hetev, and you've investigated the matter well. You investigated thoroughly. And of course, the word midrash comes from this word, the darashta. It's a noun from the word darash, and midrash means the process of thoroughly investigating, in this case, the biblical text, scripture. So, vehine, and indeed, emet, it is true, nachon hadavar, this matter is established. You know for certain this has happened. So this is also talking to us about a process of a trial and some of the issues that go into making a judgment. Excuse me. Ne'esta hatoeva hazot b'Yisrael. This abhorrent thing, this disgusting thing, was done in Israel. In Israel. Nachon. So the word nachon means mechuvan ha'edut. That is, that the testimony is consistent, that the testimony between witnesses is consistent. And this is all part of the process of weighing a case and whether or not the case is, in fact, a legitimate case. Going on. So if you've tried it, and you know that the person is guilty now. V'hotzeta et ha'ish hahu, and you shall take out this man, that man, or et ha'isha hahi, or that woman, asher asu et hadavar hazeh, hara hazeh, who have done this wicked thing, el sha'arecha, to your gates, et ha'ish or et ha'isha, either the man or the woman, uskaltam ba'avanim, and you shall stone them with stones. Yeah, it's pretty harsh. Vametu, and they die. So this is a capital offense. This is considered a capital offense. Let me do the Rashi and then maybe comment a little bit on this. So Rashi has a point to make. V'hotzeta et haishahu, and you shall take out that man, etc. El sha'arecha, to your gates. And he notices, right, that the Targum here, the Aramaic translation says litra, that is to the gate, beit dinach, of your court. Okay, so he's saying you take this person to the entrance of the courthouse. And Rashi points out Hametagem el sha'arecha, who translates the phrase el sha'arecha, to your gates, litra beit dinach, as the gate of your courthouse. To'eh, makes a mistake. This is a mistake. Shekain shaninu, because indeed we have learned in the Sifrei, in the Midrash on Numbers and Deuteronomy, called the Sifrei, El Sha'arecha, that the phrase El Sha'arecha, to your gates, Zeh Sha'ar, this refers to the gate, Sha'avad Bo, where he worshipped idolatry. He practiced idolatry. In other words, the gate of the city. O Eino Ella. So then the Midrash, this is in typical halachic Midrash form, is rigorous. It says, O Eino Ella, Shar Shinidunbu. But wait a second, the Midrash is saying, this is a style, right? To question. Perhaps it does mean the gate of where he was judged. Maybe it does mean that. How do you know for certain that it means the gate of the town? Ne'emar sha'arecha lamata. So the word sha'arecha is mentioned below, meaning here. V'ne'emar sha'arecha lamala, and the term sha'arecha, your gates, is mentioned above. And that's in that previous verse that I pointed out, right here, where it cannot mean anything else. There's the word, right? In that context, it can mean nothing but town, your city, town. So this is a legitimate derivation to explain the meaning of a word contextually, right? V'ne'emar sha'arecha lamala, and this term sha'arecha, the exact form of this word, is mentioned above. Ma sha'arecha amur lamala, just as this term sha'arecha that is stated above. Sha'ar sha'avad bo clearly refers to the quote gate quote that in which he served the idol, right? He practiced idolatry. Af sha'arecha hamur lamala. So too, this term sha'arecha that is stated lamata here in our context, sha'ar sha'avad bo, has to mean the gate in which he worshipped. The Targumo and its Aramaic translation should be lekirvayich, should be to your towns. A kiryah is a municipality or a town. Going on. Al pishnayim edim, at the mouth of two witnesses, or shlosha edim, or three witnesses, yumat hamet, can the person be condemned. A person, okay, goes on, and it goes to emphasize this. Lo yumat al pi ed echad. He shall not be condemned at the mouth of one witness. One witness is not sufficient to condemn a person, and the Torah is quite explicit about this, and that they have to have two independent witnesses, and their testimony has to be consistent, etc., in terms of trying a case. Let's take a look at the Rashi here. Shnayim edim or shlosha, two witnesses or three. Im mitkayemet edut bishnayim, if the testimony is established through two witnesses, that's the minimum number, lama prat lachab shlosha. Why does Scripture now specify three? And the answer is lahakish shlosha lishnayim, to connect three to two in this sense. Mashnayim edut echad. So just as the two have to give one testimony, in other words, their testimony has to be completely consistent. Af shlosha edut achad. Likewise, if you have three witnesses, it all has to be consistent. So that if you have two witnesses, for example, who testify independently, and by the way, they were brought into the court without the one witness hearing what the other witness had to say. And if the court examines the two witnesses and they're completely consistent, and then there's a third witness, and that third witness's testimony is not consistent, okay, then they are not, it's not acceptable testimony. So going on with a little bit of a different idea here, ve'ein ne'esin zomamin, right? And likewise, on the other side, they are not considered scheming witnesses. In other words, that they have brought testimony, false testimony, and basically the nature of this false testimony is that I think it's actually, let's say, a second set of witnesses. So the first witnesses testify as to the guilt of that individual who's being accused, and then another set of witnesses comes in and says about the first set of witnesses, you were with us at that time, and so how can you say you witnessed it? And that's discussed elsewhere in the Torah, this whole notion of scheming witnesses. And the point that Rashi appears to be making is that likewise, they are not, because what happens is that scheming witnesses are punished, okay, with the testimony that they are trying to contradict. In other words, with the very issue that they're trying to contradict, they are then punished. That's at least the way the Torah puts it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's basically what it's saying is if you deny valid testimony, then you will have to suffer the valid testimony or the consequences of that valid testimony. Unless they all, in other words, if you have three people now who come and try to scheme against these initial set of witnesses, they are not punished in that way unless they all testify in that particular way. So this is this little start here. I would have to go over the commentary, the Torah Tmima's own personal commentary, but this is somewhat of a famous statement from Tractate Sanhedrin, and it says Al Pishnayim Edim. So it says at the mouth of two witnesses. Tanya, so it says there's an early source of the time of the Mishnah before the year 200. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach is a very early teacher of this period. Shimon ben Shetach. Er'eh ben Nechama, right? So what this is, it's a phrase that basically means, while it means literally, it means I will see redemption. It's a euphemism. And basically he says, we will never see redemption. So, im lo iti, and then he discusses the case that he's talking about. Im lo iti echad, if I did not see, in other words, this is what he saw. I saw someone, a certain individual, run echad sheratz achar chaveiro lachurva, that ran after his colleague into, or associate into a ruin. V'ratzti acharav, and I ran after these people. V'ra'iti sayif beyador, and I saw a sword in the hand of the second person. V'dam mitaftef, and I saw blood dripping from the sword. V'harug mefarper, and the person he had stabbed is struggling around, right, in his death throes. Amarti lo, and I said to this person, Rasha, wicked one, mi hargo lazeh, who in fact killed this person? Ani or ata, me or you? In other words, obviously, who did, right? Aval ma eseh, but what can I do? She'ein damcha masur biyadi, because literally it means your blood is not placed in my hands. In other words, he's saying, I cannot testify that you committed this murder. In other words, because it's a capital offense, murder is considered a capital offense, and I'm not able to do that. Sha'arei amra Torah, because the Torah actually said, Al Pishnayim Edim, at the mouth of two witnesses, Yumat Hamet, shall the person condemned die, to be condemned die. And so he goes on to say, Hayodea machshavot, the one who knows people's thoughts. In other words, of course, he's referring to God, right? Yipara me'ato ha'ish, shall avenge that particular person, Sharag et Chaveiro, who killed his neighbor, his associate. Amru, and they said, Lo zazu misham, they didn't move from that place, that location, ad sheba nachash, and before a snake came, v'hikisho v'amet, and struck that second person, the murderer, v'amet, and he died. So, interesting story, right? Certainly one for us to think about, essentially in terms of the beliefs of our tradition and the understanding that ultimately we all have to be accountable and will be accountable, even though, of course, we know of so many circumstances where it's, where these kinds of situations occur, and it doesn't seem as if people walk away without having to pay the price. So even if it doesn't happen immediately, at least at some point or another, this all gets settled up. But there's also another point here, and that is the idea of being so careful about and making sure that the rules are so strict that you don't take a chance of, because there was a practice of capital punishment, although in fact once you read the Talmud and the associated literature, you realize that it happened very seldom, but at least already to give you some idea that there were tremendous rules in place to try to make sure that they never actually condemned an innocent person, and that you had to err on the side of caution in this particular case. So, onwards. Yad ha'edim tiebo barishona. The hand of the witnesses shall be against him at first, lahamito, to kill him. In other words, if you testify in this particular case, and to a point where this person was condemned, you as the witness were going to have to cast the first stone. So again, I would have to think to myself that under, let's say, regular circumstances, nobody wants to actually be doing this, and it's certainly in front of a lot of other people. And again, to make a person consider very, very carefully that they want to bring this kind of testimony against their fellow. Let's go on. V'yad kol ha'am b'acharona, and then the hand of all the people after that. Uvi'arta hara mikibecha, that you, literally, it means you remove the wickedness from your midst. This is, again, a part of the Torah that's very challenging for us, and that we have to think through what are the main points that the Torah is trying to bring across. And there's, of course, a number of issues involved. One, of course, is the issue of idolatry, and that the Torah considers this to be something that destroys humanity ultimately, and is a very very serious issue, as I mentioned before. And it's a way of the Torah trying to bring to our attention that this is not something that is casual and unimportant. I'm not, of course, basically in favor of capital punishment, but that's not the issue here. The issue is how serious this is, and whether or not we need to take this kind of behavior seriously. And how one has to deal with it at that point. And then perhaps even more importantly, how careful at the same time you have to be before you condemn someone. And I think in that sense, as we look at this entire text, to look at, on the one hand, you have a very serious infraction. On the other hand, you have very, very serious ways to prevent anyone from being condemned falsely. And I'm going to stop right here. And actually, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to move that up slightly. And I'm open to comments and your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I have a comment, but I don't know. I've seen in some of these trials, some of these witnesses are false witnesses. They got friends, and they go on the witness stand, and they say something that's entirely different, and it's a falseness. And the poor guy, it's wrong. And I've seen some judges taking bribes too. It's not right, but they do. It's human nature. And I don't understand. God says justice, justice. Yeah, I realize that, but still, no, our justice system is still blind. It's just not right yet.
Okay, Harlan, we don't live in a perfect world. And if it weren't the fact that people do these kinds of things, if people didn't do these kinds of things, we wouldn't need a Torah. The Torah wouldn't have to tell us to try to avoid doing these things if it were natural. Remember, this is the point I make, that the Torah is about doing what doesn't come naturally, and saying that part of how we develop as human beings is to work very hard to prevent these things from happening. Essentially, I do have, it's not that I'm an expert on it. I basically do have faith in the justice system. I haven't seen, I'm not saying that I haven't seen very clever attorneys, but on the other hand, I don't generally think that there are a lot of, judges that are not, fair. Everyone has their bias. You cannot avoid that. But to say that a judge is actually perverting justice or taking bribes, I have not witnessed it. And I haven't read about in the paper that much either. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I tend to think that it's the exception rather than the rule. And we have to focus on the fact that, we do the best we can in an imperfect world. It's not perfect. So I'm going to stop the recording here.